welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this is very important because we are developing some content for our youth communities. And World Talent Economy Forum actually really helpful for the youth, and they can learn from different perspective, different culture, and we will discuss on technology enhanced learning. So I want to start from Professor Edward uh, about this topic, and how do you want to analyze this topic, technology enhanced learning?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that this is exactly the topic that should be at the basis for all of our discussions, because really education is the beginning of understanding technology, of developing technology, of applying technology. This is the most important thing, or important activity for any country, because what is unique about human beings is that we have a mind, that we can understand the world around us. We can utilize that knowledge to create a better world for ourselves. The technology, the age of advanced technology, really opens up opportunities. I think as profound as when the printing press was invented. So instead of having books only available for a handful of people, usually monks or people of that sort, and very few people could read anyway, the printing press was a technology that allowed books to be printed in mass. And then, of course, we had an education system developed first in the West and other countries to bring literacy to the masses. But now we have an even more important opportunity. Here's the problem. Certainly in Western countries, and many of the emerging economies have copied what was done in the West. We have an old-fashioned assembly line mass production system of education. Kids go down the assembly line, and at 9 o'clock they get math poured into their heads, and at 10 o'clock they get reading poured into their heads, and 11 o'clock they get something else poured into their heads. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. In recent decades, especially, thinkers have learned that looked at new methods. Actually, going back a century, Maria Montessori developed methods to focus on the individual student, because we all learn we all learn different. I have two 10-year-old daughters. One is very good at math, but one is not so good. They each have different ways of processing, so I have to deal with them and help them in different ways. But here's the thing about technology. Now it can really be individualized. First of all, as students can get a general background, but then with not only technology like we have here, not only technology, for example, where you can go online to the Khan Academy and get as good of information and learning as you would get in a school. Not only can you go to companies that sell courses, the best college courses in the country, like in this country, the Learning, Great Courses series. Now you really can develop interactive learning with technology. It can be interactive in the traditional way of teaching kids. It can be interactive in training workers, for example. In terms of skills. It's the sort of thing where, for example, before a surgeon ever operates, he can operate virtually in a virtual environment with a VR set or even without the VR set and on a hologram of some sort. This is the kind of technology we have now. We all think about innovation and innovators as the type of people like Steve Jobs, who invents mass produces, that is, iPhones and things of that. But I really look forward to the age where innovators and entrepreneurs get into education and kind of break the current monopoly that government tends to have on education. And it's all bad, by the way. Understand me, I'm not saying it is, but that entrepreneurs can do so much better. They can look at ways of delivering education, and that can be lifelong education. Again, for workers whose skills are no longer needed, or whose demand is fading, they can essentially improve their skills along the way because of access to the technology and the way it can be provided. So I'm looking forward to an age where entrepreneurs do for education what they have done for the kind of communications information technology we're using right now.
Thank you. Professor David, how do you want to analyze today's topic, technology enhanced learning? Already our other speakers also joined, Professor Adrian, Mr. Donald, thank you for joining. So Professor David, yeah.
Well, I agree with a lot of what he said. The future of education has changed so very, very much. You know, the mega trends on it is when I was young, you went to school, you worked, maybe did a little bit of training while you worked, and then you retired. And then we began to shift to a time where you went to school, you worked for a while, then you stopped working, went back to school, then worked for a while. Now we're in this whole blended type of education and training where you mix it together constantly. You work, you play, and you learn constantly throughout your career, kind of a lifelong learning approach. And even the way we are looking at education has dramatically changed. I agree with what Edward said that higher education has its place for few things, but the number is dwindling in what is required to go to college for today. You know, we're seeing many places where boot camps, continuing education programs, certifications are coming back into play like they did 200 years ago. And so, what old is new again in a lot of the things, particularly if I look at areas like developing, actually, even engineering, because the pace of knowledge transfer and change in those is so great that you constantly have to be refreshing yourself and reinventing yourself to play. And because of the pace of change, we've seen softer skills become really paramount to learning. Uh, Things like social emotional learning. We used to see SEL as something you did in elementary school, middle school, the awkward years of high school. But now SEL is even being applicable for senior citizens. It's applicable for when you make major shifts in industry, like when robotics come in and replace labor, where you see industries being disaggregated, even soldiers coming back and leaving the military and going to other areas. The type of training, the type of teaching, the type of things we need to teach has now gotten so broad where it's not just an academic subject, it's not just a skill subject, but it's really the softer skills of how do you cope with change? How do you do with the new social emotional mandates where information is global immediately, where what you do ripples far beyond of what it used to be. You know, I am really glad when I was a teenager I didn't have social media back then, because I would have to be playing down a whole bunch of things and trying to take it off the internet. But that's part of how even education has changed. The fact that I can go to DuckDuckGo and search something and in a matter of a few days have a really good knowledge base, where before it would take years. I did a project for the military on high energy density storage. I got a contract. A month later, I presented to all the chief scientists at all the military labs around the United States. And I had chief scientists come up and ask me how many decades I had been working in high energy density storage. I hated to tell them I've only known about it for a month. But that is really the power of how the whole approach to learning, to teaching, to information gathering, and in particularly information synthesis. Old days, you learn synthesis in a PhD program. We need to push learning synthesis down in the at least high school level and make sure it's a skill that you have as a lifelong. So those are my high level thoughts. It's one that I particularly am passionate about because one of the portfolio companies we bought is a social emotional learning company. And we're bringing out a whole new style of approaching social emotional learning that's applicable for multiple generations. And that's kind of my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Rob, how do you want to analyze today's topic, technology enhanced learning?
Okay, so we discovered during the pandemic that the methods that we're using to teach students didn't transition well to remote learning. Teachers complained about having to be technical support. A lot of kids didn't have the hardware that they needed. The structure that was set up to allow a teacher in a large classroom to kind of coordinate their classroom's activities, that it just didn't work if you put the students and made them remote. Kids have many distractions. Their ability to focus on the content is much more limited, and that does mean that the content that was designed for in classroom didn't transition to online. The practices with the teachers and skill set didn't transition to online. And the one place that seemed to do well was an outfit called Land School that was purchased by Lenovo a couple of years back. The schools that were using Land School transitioned very well. And the reason is because Land School was predominantly used for schools that were having to instruct students that couldn't come to school. They had an illness like cancer or were physically disabled or whatever. And there are schools that have a substantial number of students that just can't come in. And the Land School solution seemed to do the job. And the reason is it was designed from the ground up for remote learning. And it's kind of what you have to do here is if you want to apply technology to a different way of doing something, you often have to go back and revisit the premise that created the project in the first place. Because the premise for school was all the kids are going to be in the room under control of the teacher, but that has shortcomings in terms of individual instruction because the teacher is spread so thinly. Online, it's actually easier to give individual instruction because you don't have you can isolate the student, you can deal with them directly, and you can also vary the amount of help you give the student based on their need. Where a lot of times in classroom, students that are underperforming kind of get lost in the mass. Using metrics and analytics, you can tell which students are underperforming, and then the teacher can apply her skills to that student individually. So it really requires going back and looking at what are the advantages and disadvantages of the new mode that you're involved in, and then crafting a solution that meets those conditions. And that's what Land School did. Land School was designed specifically to address the needs of remote learning, to remove the problems of maintaining the hardware from the teacher. And I had a chance to interview a couple of the teachers a while back, and their most exciting part of the solution was the fact that they didn't have to do tech support. Now, as a technology analyst, I know how annoying doing tech support can be. It's not one of my favorite things to do either, but doing it with 30 some odd kids has got to be kind of crazy because the kids are breaking stuff half the time when they're getting bored. And so having a way to offload the technical support and then focus on the students individually made a big difference. Going forward, I think the real opportunity is to apply initially focused and then general AI to this problem, because what artificial intelligence can do is it can customize a curriculum for an individual if it's properly trained. And we're not anywhere near the level of training we need to have this happen yet. But once started, in a couple of years, you could have the equivalent of modern expert systems that could look at a student, provide them with advice as to where they would best fit at whatever age level they are, and allow them to progress at their own speed. Some students might progress faster, some students slower. And once again, this is a problem for the traditional in-classroom education because it's hard to separate the overachievers from the underachievers. But individually, you can do that. And so there are some significant potential advantages to applying technology, particularly to remote learning, which is probably going to be with us on and off for a while, really depending on what happens to the pandemic. So looking at how technology can enhance, can focus, can provide the kind of detailed in-person and customized curricula that a student would require can result and I think Land School has proven this, can result in a higher return from the students. They're more engaged because you're addressing directly any issues they have with attention span, and you're monitoring through analytics, so you can tell when they've stopped paying attention and they've started playing video games or something along those lines, and then put your attention back on the student to bring them back to the screen, or let their caregiver know that maybe they need to intercede and get the kid back to work, or maybe this is just you give them an individual break. It's a timeout period for that one student, and you can do that so much easier remotely because you don't have the social aspects of when you put a kid in the corner, they're embarrassed. What you're doing to the student now is individual. The punishment doesn't become public. It doesn't have to become public, and so your focus is tighter, but it can be certainly enhanced with some of the technologies that we have coming in, like artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Professor Adrian. How do you want to analyze today's topic?
Well, I have two perspectives. One is more, let's say, academic, and another one is my own personal experience. So before I had children, if you asked me this, I would say from an academic viewpoint, the schools, most schools, they are changing. Most schools are designed in the industrial era, and industrial age, started with a steam engine and mass production. I think it was Ford that made the first mass-produced car. So if you look at let's say the zeitgeist of industrial era, where you have a production line, and things move along the production line like making a car. Then schools are designed exactly like the let's say culture of the industrial era. Each student is a part of a big industrial process, and you move along at a set pace, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12, and then you're out. And so the way schools are designed is from the culture and the zeitgeist of the industrial era. And what I would say, and what a lot of people are saying, is that after the internet age or computer age, let's say, the industrial era is over, basically, and we're now in the computer and internet age. So the school cultures will change accordingly to the new era that we're in, but it takes time. And I would say that I would have said before it would take until 2030 or 40 or 50 before schools will change. But then one thing that happened was the coronavirus, and that instantly made millions and millions of school children learn through the computers at their home. And so I think we, because of coronavirus, have actually gone far faster in the change in culture of schools. And I was recently, today actually, I was reading an article in New York Times that even when New York's mayor said that children could go back to school physically, more than 60% of parents chose to keep the students with online learning. 60%. Well, we don't know what the reasons are yet because this is still ongoing. But I think this shows that maybe the kids or the parents or both see advantages in online learning, and we may be going to very quickly go to a new model of school because of the coronavirus. And my personal experience is my daughter. She started a online school, American school, because of my I'm a single dad, and because of my work, I had to travel a lot to give keynote speeches everywhere. So we were on a flight almost every week. So the only real solution was online learning. But that brought opportunities. My daughter started doing boxing and doing very serious boxing training 6 days a week, which would be impossible to do with the normal school hours, because she was, in the boxing gym every afternoon, evening. Of course, unfortunately, the gym shut down because of the coronavirus pandemic, but should be starting again hopefully as soon as possible. Anyway, so my major point is that I think we were heading for a change because we have entered the computer age already, and we've passed the industrial age. We were headed for a change in the school system, and I think coronavirus sped things up maybe 20 or 30 years because of the coronavirus. And I don't think we're going to go back to where we were before.
Thank you. Professor Donald, how do you want to analyze today's topic?
I want to start by reminding people that if you look up the definition of technology in the dictionary, it says the practical applications of scientific advances. That's what they call it. And so that means that it's not just things, it's not just the physical things that we use, but it's the methods and the mindset of education as well is new technology. And as Edward said, there have been great advances. We know so much more now about neuroscience. We know so much more about sociology, behavior, psychology, and all those kinds of things than we used to. And you look at a country like Finland, in their K-12 system, they don't have individual classes, subjects. So they don't go to math and then to history and then to English like that. It's all one thing. They stopped doing that because they found that knowledge is it has to be an interconnection of different kinds of things. You can't really know if you can't really have a belief that something's true. Ultimately, that's what truth is, and it's your own belief that it's true or not. We like to think that there's an external reality that we're mapping to, but it's doesn't seem to be the way that it works from what we've learned in neuroscience. But the point I'm making is that there, as someone pointed out, Montessori schools. Well, there's models in Finland where they take every new advance and they look at it and they say, well, is this going to help our kids be better? Is this going to make our society and the country we live in better? Is this going to make people, make things better? And if they find something that is, they try it out for a while, and if it works really well, then they adopt it. And the people in the country go, wow, this rocks. Like we've got one of the best K-12 education systems in the world. They also have a really top university system. Their postgraduate, which I'll get into, or after graduate is great too. What I want to say is that I can talk about remote learning and stuff like that later in more detail, but because I've spent the last 30 years doing training in industry and in universities, so I've got quite a bit of experience. And it was already cheaper for the companies to start trying to do remote learning than to fly instructors around and fly students into classes and things like that. So that's been a tendency in industry for a long time. And it's very, very difficult to do right. And so, but back to what I really was wanting to say is that in order to make these transitions, it isn't, you can blame the government for having these K-12 and kinds of things like that. But every single solitary time they try to change anything, these people come down to the school board, they have recall elections for the supervisors, people just riot. So there's this incredible conservative thing in the United States and conservative means just basically against change. So there's this incredible group of people that are very well organized, that are against change, completely against change in our society. A lot of them have acted by homeschooling their kids, taking their school out of the school system because they're upset that the curriculum isn't highly religious. And so so that kind of technology, the technology of the better techniques of learning and things like that, the biggest headwind is just people don't want to change.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron. Can you unmute?
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest things holding us back as a species, period, is the fear of change. We tend to fear things that we don't understand. I grew up in the information age. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I grew up right at the dawn of the information age. I was going to school while all these transitions were happening. And one of the funny points I like to make is our teachers told us, you won't have a calculator in your pocket all the time, once you're out of school. And boy, we sure proved them wrong. Schools were very frustrating. They did move along at a very set analog pace, and you weren't really allowed to go outside of that pace. But yet you could go home, hop on Wikipedia, YouTube, Google Scholar now, and as long as you're cross-checking the information you're getting, to confirm and to validate it, then, you're getting almost the same degree, same quality, if not better of an education than the school systems were providing at that time because of their cut and dry one-size-fits-all methodology. Personally, I'm very excited to see this change occurring. I think that it's going to help people who aren't necessarily considered neurotypical, but might be very brilliant in a lot of ways to realize their brilliance. It's like judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree. You're going to live your whole life thinking the fish is worthless. So as far as everybody else's points go, they pretty much touched on everything I was wanting to talk about. From, the very definition of technology is, applying thinking to solving problems. And applying that to different learning methods, and once AI does get to the point, configuring algorithms to figure out what methods work better for teaching this student mathematics versus this student. How does this person process language versus this person to learn more languages or learn a target language better? Things like that, as well as figuring out students' weak points. And that's what's really going to help change things. And now, thanks to COVID, I almost dare say, we have a dedicated push towards this. You already have servers popping up to analyze all this new data coming in. And we can just hope, that it is used wisely moving forward, because as projects like Neuralink start coming to, headings and findings, the inevitability of this is that one day, hopefully, we'll be able to interface with some sort of a quantum computing AI almost directly and be able to learn data almost like the Matrix at a near upload speed, at the speed of thought, as it were. Now, this is still quite a ways off, and perhaps it will never come, but it is the endeavor of many such projects, and I would be very excited to see that happen in the future.
Thank you. Professor Edward, even this question for everyone, because for developed nations, this kind of like online learnings or remote learnings and this kind of support is very good because they have a very good infrastructure, internet connections, people has laptops and all of the infrastructure. But yes, Malaysia, Singapore, Asia Pacific, this okay. But when we discuss in this COVID-19 situation about developing nations, example, country like India, Bangladesh, or this kind of country, especially Bangladesh, last 14 months, all of their education system closed. All. Even I have a record that around 70% student drop out. Even in Malaysia, 50% student drop out. So in that situation, what will be the next like future strategy for education system? Like country like developing nations, when huge amount of student drop out, it's not only the infrastructural problem, even though economical problem also a big issues. Many students drop out because of financial challenge and many more things. So there are two aspects. One is technological infrastructure, and another one is financial challenges and everything. How we can overcome from this situation? This is major challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a couple of general comments. First of all, I mean, in a sense, you can think of the COVID pandemic like a war. When you have a war, a country is disrupted in many ways, financially, uh, you know, in terms of physical issues, et cetera. Obviously, in places like India, the death rate has been horrible, the costs of hospitalization and so forth. It literally, think of it as the fact that you're in a war. When you're coming out of a war, what you have to do is say, okay, things have been disrupted. In this case, we're talking about the education system being disrupted. So now essentially there's no easy way. Since we've been talking about the problems of one size fits all education, there's no one size fits all approach for Bangladesh versus India versus some other country to deal with the issues that you just discussed. They're each going to have to evaluate it. As you know, in India, for example, you have 200 to 300 million, I think it's more like something along those lines, people who are now considered middle class by Indian standards, who do have access to many of the technologies that we in the West tend to have access to. And you have rural pockets that don't have the technology, that are very poor, don't even have basics like clean water and things of that nature. So there's going to be no one size fits all approach. Each government and local officials as well are going to have to evaluate and say, okay, how do we have this destructive wave hit us? Now, what do we do? And you're going to find different applications or different ways to approach the issue. I think, fortunately, because of the technology, we have, as the other speakers have all noted, we are ahead of the game, because we're having this discussion right now, because my two children right now are having their classes right now on Zoom. Now, by the way, it's very difficult for my daughter who's taking violin to actually get violin lessons online, because, or through Zoom. And so sometimes it doesn't work as well as in person, but at least we now have the tools, so to speak, the technology for governments and local school districts to figure out the best way to approach this. I want to make one other quick comment that I think is important, and especially for countries that are more advanced and developed. And again, in the Asian Pacific area, certainly Singapore is at the top, South Korea, Japan, we could go down the list. We've been talking about the applications of technology. I want to talk about the importance of entrepreneurs. I want to talk about the importance of a market for education. In the United States, after World War II, there were something like 100,000 school districts, with their own governing boards. Again, these are government, local government, but again, the parents had a lot of input into the situation. The parents knew the members of the Board of Education. They would see them in the grocery store. They would see them. They could say, "Hey, we don't like the way things are going." We now, because of consolidation in this country, we now have something like only 15,000 school districts. In many cases, that was a good idea, because you have economies of scale, for example, in terms of buildings and many, many other things. On the other hand, the customer is more and more distant from the provision of the service, in this case, education. I spent yesterday writing up a paper to give to my local Board of Education, because they're proposing to introduce what I consider to be a sort of a neo-racist approach to everyone should work together, but there are some people who are more valuable than others. But the point is this: I'd like to see the market for education, and this is where you really need more input from the customer. We do have a lot of homeschoolers in this country. I know a lot of them. But it's not just because they're religious and they don't like the fact that the schools are, not teaching religion. A lot of them have opted out just because they see the schools as not doing a good job for their kids. So again, in terms of having a diversified approach to education, with the kind of mix we've been talking about, I think that's important. And having that mindset is going to help countries now emerging from COVID to figure out how to reintroduce kids into the system, how to get them re-engaged, where is the money best spent, in the system. And it's going to be very much a country by country and even a more local focus of an issue on the issues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor David.
Well, Edward, I'm one of the families that opted out and homeschooled in high school. And it really was because the type of learning needs weren't being met. And they were not teaching collaborative skills. They were not teaching skills that would let the student learn to present, and other elements like that. And they were not encouraging the spark of education. My son loves history. He's won at the National History Fair competition, at the state competitions. And if I can give him something in a historical context, he loved it. When he was a junior, senior, he taught younger kids history in the homeschooling groups we were in. And that is one of the things I think these options do. If it's okay with you, I'm going to share one slide because I think it's really appropriate here. And let me go to it. And let me see if we've got it.
Share option, yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it and see if it will let me share. It's not letting me share. Okay, I'll be fine.
You can share, no problem.
Okay, let me try again.
From
share
our
screen.
side, no problem.
There we go. This slide you're looking at right now with the multi-generational workforce, this is the same type of thing we have to teach in education today, because education, again, is lifelong. But what's interesting here is if you look at the attitudes towards the career, how they communicate is, what's their preferences when making decisions, the different way they begin to do things. This is the type of things that we have to adopt to as we're doing things in society today. And particularly when it comes to education and learning. I learn differently than my 27-year-old son learns. He learns differently than my friends' kids who are in elementary school and middle school. And we, as people trying to teach them, to help guide them, we have to adapt to these generational type of approaches. I started at the University of Texas teaching. God, I'm dating myself, back in the 70s. And what we did then versus now is very different in the learning style and learning approaches. In fact, I was part of a College of Business reaccreditation program back then, where they were threatening not to reaccredit the business school at UT because of our class size. And they totally discounted any use of technology. And to the evaluation team, we actually took months helping them see qualitatively and quantitatively how the use of technology enhanced the learning for the students. And that was in the 70s and early 80s. Today, we're so much better with what we can do. Our methods for collecting analytics. And analytics today is an important part of education. We have to have those feedback loops built into it. and we have to do check-ins with the different students as they go forward, particularly in the online environment, like so many of us have spoken about. It just gives us a whole new way to sense, monitor, and update. And, you know, to me, homeschooling, church schooling, public schooling, private schooling are actually converging now. They used to be very different. And not only is the schooling converging, but actually corporate training is converging with the same approaches. Well, not only just corporate training, how we as adults learn is converging there. How we as senior citizens learn is converging there. And so this is really a time where we're seeing hyper convergence in education, training, and learning.
Thank you. Professor Rob.
Well, the original question was how do you balance the income needs in an emerging economy with the education needs of a nation? And the reality is going back to the comments made earlier, is it starts with analytics. And until you understand the problem, you can't derive a fix for it. But what you're probably going to have to do is identify the areas where the students have to work, can't go into school, and then provide resources for those students to learn at home or learn while they're on the job. Incentives for their employer to provide that education, and at the very least, prioritize connectivity, because if you can't connect to these students, you won't be able to address it and train them. In the meantime, you can do things. I mean, realize this country, the United States, had this same problem before the turn of the last century, where students were expected to help with the harvest. Students were expected to put in a full day of work as well as school, and so school had to adjust for those students' needs. But the kids still got educated. It's just that during times of harvest or during times when they had to work, those are times when the school was shut down, and then the students had homework assignments that they had to do while they were working. But you can adjust. But the thing is that you start off with analytics. You analyze the problem. Some regions need special help and focus. Other regions don't. But everybody needs to be connected, because if they're not connected, they can't get access to resources at scale. And right now, our power is in bidirectional remote resources at scale. And the hope is, of course, some things like Starlink may bring connectivity at lower cost to remote areas. We'll see. Governments often resist a third party coming in and providing connectivity because they want to control the information stream, which can make it problematic in certain geographies. And so the part of what also has to happen is an acceptance of the students being able to look at stuff that perhaps the government doesn't want them to look at, and a certain amount of effort to make sure that foreign governments can't come in and use these methods to indoctrinate the students in a method that you wouldn't want them indoctrinated. In other words, anti-government propaganda and that kind of thing has to keep out of the channel, stay out of the channel. But it really begins with a plan. You have to analyze the problem. Every country is undoubtedly different, and regions within a country are undoubtedly different, with the goal of getting the kids whatever the basic education is they need to progress. And if you're primarily agrarian, then perhaps a lot of that education should surround animal husbandry, farming, the kinds of things that they're going to be able to immediately apply to their work life, and maybe free up some of their time to do other things. A lot of the farming that's done in emerging countries is very inefficient, and a little bit of help can go a long way with regard to moving water and providing resources. And sometimes it's setting up partnerships with companies that want to move into the country. A program I'm very fond of is the Cisco CDA program, where the company goes into the country, assesses what the problems are, volunteers the technology to fix the problems in exchange for a favorable position in terms of bidding and entry in general business in the country. It's a quid pro quo, if you would, in terms of we'll help you where you want help, you help us where we want help, and move forward from there. So But at the very beginning, you don't want to throw a bunch of stuff at the problem. You want to analyze the problem, figure what things work and what don't through trial. We can do simulation now, and I think every country has the capability of being able to do simulation and figure out which things are going to work best for them. We don't live in a cookie cutter world. Sadly, education often treats students as a cookie cutter. I can imagine going into a doctor, and as you walk through the door, they hand you aspirin and give you 5 or 6 different shots because that's what they give to everybody. That's kind of how education works in most places. It's not how it should work. We have the ability to customize the program for every individual student if we do it online and use current tools. And that's really where the goal should be for those that have to work, come up with a curriculum that works for that. For those that have a tremendous affinity for math but aren't really good at some other things, we craft a program that helps their affinity and then also helps them grow interest in the other areas to get the necessary breadth. Right now, STEM is incredibly important, no matter what it is you do, and STEM should be the core part of any of these programs. But regardless, it really comes down to using technology to first identify the problem, get it down to a granular level, and then provide a granular solution that addresses the problem to the greatest extent you can for the amount of money and resources that you have.
Thank you, Professor Adrian.
Well, a lot of people mentioned about the lifelong learning, so I think that's another very, very important part. No longer is learning just 12 years of school and maybe university, but everyone has to constantly learn and relearn, and careers will change much faster than they did before. And this again is a direct result of the internet, computers, and who knows what's going to happen with the AI, artificial intelligence, and robots. So I think that's one area we really don't know what's going to happen. What kind of jobs will humans really do in the future when or if AI can take over most jobs? So, but the whatever it is, I think we will have to keep learning, relearning, and so we have to keep learning our entire lives. That's definitely the new age that we're in now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Donald. Can you unmute, please?
I'm going to go back to something I go to often, which is the whole thing of culture in the society that we live in. In Finland, teachers are some of the highest paid professionals, and it's harder to get into teacher school than it is to get into medical school. And they are incredibly admired. I find that when I teach and my students are from South Asia, Indians, Chinese, and others, the fact that I'm very well educated, it makes me, they respect that. They very, very much respect. And not only that, I find that people very much respect that I have a kind of eclectic background, so that I'm not just an engineer, or I'm not just a sociologist or whatever like that. They really admire the breadth of knowledge. And in the United States, there is just for historical reasons, we have a lot of people that are against general types of education. There's a strong argument that's made and often made that that people should be trained to have a job. I mean, they need to go out into society and work and do and contribute the way that and be part of it. So I think we need both. We need people who, are their focus is more on their families or something else like that, and work is, part of their life. And then people who are constantly like learning and growing. So when I teach in Finland, some of my students are people who were on basically unemployment because the particular jobs that they had went away, and they're being re-educated into ways that help them adapt more to the society. So back to the question of how can you work with this when there's not enough resources? One thing is to not reinvent the wheel. I mean, you can look at the countries that are successful and ask yourself the question, what are they doing? And then it goes back to what everyone else has said, which is that not everybody's the same. I don't think if you applied the Korean system to Finland, it would work as well. Or if you applied the Finnish system to Korea, I don't think it would work very well. So you can analyze that in broad strokes. I want to say that a cautionary thing is that there's a lot of talk here about using like mechanical tools to teach people, AI and stuff like that. Well, you have to realize that how we know how to use language, which is one of our most important things that we know how to do, comes from interaction with other people. Language you can't have a language that you speak that no one else but you knows. That doesn't make any sense. Language is something that we do with each other. And how we create the meaning of everything around us is something that happens because of the interaction of the people that are around us. So if we live in an area that's got a certain point of view, and the people we interact with have that point of view, then we're going to assume that point of view is correct. So I think that no matter, as a teacher, I teach meta things. So like I've taught a lot of engineers and software engineers, and I always try and teach them right at the beginning. It's very exercise based because I'm teaching them programming languages and operating the system internals and stuff like that. And the first thing I do is I can try to convince them that it's okay to make mistakes. I say, pigeons can type things out of books. So if you're trying to learn how to do something technical, the best thing that can happen to you in a classroom is that something goes wrong, because at that point you can sort it out and actually learn what you learn so much more. I mean, learning is doing something new. So if you already know something, then you don't need to learn it, right? And if you don't know something, how could you possibly never make mistakes? It doesn't make any sense. But that's meta learning that the teacher provides. And then the last thing that I want to say about that is that suppose we did have some wonderful AI that was trained to teach people better and teach people things on an individual basis. There's two main aspects of that are problematic. One is, what data do you use to train it with? And usually what's been happening is that what we're getting is incredibly normative things that drive people into these very narrow set of assumptions. I mean, where does the innovation come from if we train everybody to be the same? And in a way, when we're talking about individualized education, what we're talking about is, in a sense, finding better ways to teach everybody to be the same. And I also want to point out that the technology industry, the IT industry, is also it consists of mining, it consists of energy consumption, it consists of all of these things that without those things, we wouldn't be able to do AI. So there's kind of a mountain with AI at the tip, and you need to look at the whole mountain and understand for your particular country where in the mountain you are. And for any individual, depending on what they want in life, we measure success, and when we develop metrics, like what are we going to measure? When in the United States, when they've tried to have metrics that go across to be sure that everyone's getting enough resources, people freak out. They can't stand it. So you've got to really understand in your country, like what kind of metrics that you can develop for success that don't box people in, and the creativity. And people are working on that all over the world, but it's a serious danger that you become a monoculture. So anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron.
Yeah, so one of the questions I've always had is, why don't our schools typically teach younger students ways that they could be making money right now legally? And I think that would go a long way towards addressing the issue at hand, which is, in places where people can't afford to keep going to school, how can you incentivize them to be able to continue to go to school on both a will level and on a fundamental financial level? You have a lot of like coding being taught in schools, but they don't show them that you can freelance your coding on Fiverr. I feel like there's just not much in a way of actually teaching them applicable financial skills. So pretty much that's all I've got to say is that that, and also in conjunction with maybe utilization of some sort of a blockchain technology by some schools to make their records keeping systems more efficient. That will reduce a lot of operating and processing costs. Not only that, but you also have the opportunity for higher education systems to implement a sort of and I know this is a word not a lot of people like, but cryptocurrency or a blockchain-based currency specific to that school. Now, I'm not sure what the ramifications of that are. It's just an idea to allow some sort of, per person investment in your own school that you can get a return out of in a real and tangible way. I think that schools trying to think of ways to provide financial incentive instead of just, taking money might be a good way, though I'm not sure how that would be implemented. Again, it's just an idea, just my thoughts on it.
Thank you. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks to Mr. Rob. Yes. I think he wants to leave early, so I come back to you. Mr. Rob, what are the concluding remarks for?
Right. Sorry. Concluding remarks. I had to find the screen. Sure. So the pandemic has allowed us to kind of relook at education, and it needed a relook. The concept of teaching everybody the same curriculum just does not work, and it works even worse at scale. And so by using the benefits of the pandemic, which did allow us to focus more on students individually, we've developed some tools. We've developed additional capabilities. The video conferencing platforms in and of themselves are 5 years to 7 years ahead of where they otherwise would have been had we not had the pandemic. So we've got the capability now to create a better education system. And as others have said, we can now use those capabilities to address the students' needs, both individually in terms of their capability and in terms of the needs of their society. In other words, if they have to work, we can work around that. If they have unique requirements with regard to their culture or their home situation, we can work around that. And we can do that at scale with technology, but it means we have to be willing to change. And as many folks have pointed out, change is very difficult to us. And if we don't have the willingness to change, then all of this is moot. Thank you all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor David. Professor David, yes.
Sorry, I had to unmute it. You're in a topic that really, more than most of the topics we talk about, changes and sets the future. This affects multiple generations. It affects nations. It affects regions. It affects communities. It affects families, and it affects individuals. So it really is one where the strategy, the policies, the methodology, which everyone is using and is constantly changing, has to be taken as a whole. You know, I can one-on-one impact and change people, but the real leverage, the real point to help a nation advance themselves is the power of taking this and applying it and adapting it and doing the analytics, modeling, and matrices and the PKIs that are necessary to have the most impact. And education, training is the place where your leveraging is not a linear approach. It's a litho approach to where payback is very big, but it has to be done deliberately, and it has to be done looking at the whole child, the whole community, and the whole region to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
Education in isolation is great, but it doesn't move the mountains. And we have, particularly after COVID, with the education reset that people have talked about, we have the opportunities to move the mountains.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Edward.
Yeah, this has been an excellent discussion, and I think we're pretty much in agreement on many of the points that education in the future is going to more and more rely on technology. Technology allows us to take education and make it relevant to different communities, to different socioeconomic groups, to rural versus urban, and so forth, to apply it, in a more individualized and a more focused manner, and that we are going to get away from the 19th century, 20th century mass production model, and that it's going to be education entrepreneurs who are going to figure out the best ways to take the technology and apply it to their individual situations. Don has mentioned Finland, which has an excellent education system. Finland's a country that has 5.5 million people. I'm in the state of Maryland here. We have about 7 million people, 6 or 7 million people. And so what might work in Finland might not work exactly the same way in Maryland or in Virginia or other places, or in Bangladesh or whatever. But we can learn from the different systems. We can experiment, we can try different ways. And that's why I really advocate entrepreneurship in education, just as we advocate entrepreneurship in producing other goods and services. And again, I thank you for an absolutely excellent show.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor Adrian.
Well, to summarize, I think the main thing about technology is we are moving from have moved to the computer age. So the old industrial age style classroom will slowly disappear. We may the coronavirus pandemic greatly sped up the move to online learning and flexible learning, and also because of the internet, because of computers, AI, robots, we all have to become lifelong learners, because our careers may have many changes in our lives, and many jobs will be able to be done by AI and robots in the future. So we have to learn new skills and new jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Adrian. Professor Donald.
Norbert Wiener invented cybernetics. He invented the term. And so when we say cyber this or cyber that, it all came from a term of basically control with feedback that Norbert Wiener invented. And he cautioned us all the way back in the 40s about the scope of the technological change that automation was going to take and some of its social impacts. And he pointed out that life is not all just working. We're not robots. If we have a job that is replaced by a robot, if our job is taken by a mechanical slave, and we get upset that our job has been taken by a mechanical slave, then what are we being upset about? That we don't get to be slaves? I mean, hello, that doesn't make any sense. So when we talk about the whole idea of individual education for each kind of person, we're talking about, let's just say one person is a visual learner and one person is an auditory learner, which was a theory that's been debunked incidentally. But it was, let's just say we alter the education or the way we teach them so that each one of them is taught in a different way. But the question is what are we teaching them to do? I mean, the end result, it's the end result that we're interested in, and it's true that it seems very true that there would be more effective ways to make people be able to do the tasks that are necessary at the particular point in time that they're being taught. And as others have mentioned, that can rapidly change, and whatever specific skills you've learned to fit into the economic structure, this economic social structure, that can change. And as I said, in Finland, they do try and retrain people, and that's an important thing. But what I also say is that don't forget all the other things that make humans be humans. And people who go get degrees in literature oftentimes wind up making just as much money as somebody who got a degree in engineering. They get into marketing or some management or some other aspect when they go to graduate school. Like very few people, it seems in my experience, actually do what they studied as an undergraduate. We do one thing and then we go to business school or engineering school or something, kind of change what we're doing. Anyway, without art, music, without play, we're kind of doomed. And that's what the Finns have done in their in their K-12 education system, is that they teach people to really be able to do addition and subtraction and multiplication by setting up a store. And they learn how investment works and all these kinds of things, and start understanding all this by playing games. But the games can't be just video games. They have to be with people, because we are so far from even having an idea of how language works and how some of the things that we assume are just on the horizon in artificial intelligence, that it's not funny. But the point of the matter is, I'll give one more example about that, is that Stanford University has gotten to be absolutely, they cheat, they go to jail. One woman went to jail for cheating, trying to get kids into good universities like Stanford. And everybody was applying for their MBA program and their computer science program, because they knew if they had a degree from Stanford in either of those things, they'd get jobs and their lives would be wonderful. But Stanford itself has in its mission statement that what they're trying to do is make the world a better place. That's their mission. And so they started saying, we've got to reorient what we're doing and start making it so that we do more humanities. We do more focus on social sciences. We try and expand those programs. And Stanford actually created a program where undergraduates take a year off, either before, middle, or after their schooling, and go someplace to work on a project that helps the world. Like they've gone and helped build dams in Africa, and or get rid of dams in Africa, whatever help build people's water supplies in Chicago. And all of the people that do that are happier and more successful, and it's so important in their lives. To be around, it changes people. So if you can have if anybody can make an education system that helps, you got to help people be able to make a living. I mean, that's totally important. But at the same time, if you have an education system that helps people be better people and help your society, it's gonna allow for people to be able to want to work together to make change and all the kinds of things that are so difficult in some places in the developed world. So my recommendation is, hey, and it's cheap too. Just think about that. Getting people to go out and help other people doesn't cost anything really, or it costs very little. And the Rotary Club and others would be happy to help you. So
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Aaron.
Yeah, I think Professor Donald really hit the nail on the head with that. I think STEM is pretty much irrelevant without STEAM, and the A that I've added there represents art. Without compassion and the study of beauty and the study of art and being taught the human aspect of life, and maybe even in some regards, I venture to say almost the spiritual side of life. Without that, none of this progress matters because it's not going to come to any reasonable head. It's not going to be wielded with the intent of creating prosperity and creating beauty. And I think that's a fear that Donald also touched on with all the AI and all that stuff, because there is a double edge to that sword. If we don't apply all of our technology with compassion, with humility, and in the study of art and of beauty, then what's it all really about if there's no human aspect left by the time it's all said and done? And I think that's the biggest problem that we've all been touching on with the education system thus far, is that it's very much that approach, and I would hate to see that continued. So until we start really emphasizing STEAM instead of STEM, and art and beauty alongside of science and mathematics, even in terms of presenting mathematics, showing kids cool pictures of fractals right off the bat and saying, this is mathematics and it's beautiful. I think that would really help people make that connection and realize that and bring everything together and kind of realize that it's all one learning experience in general, and that there are several different parts of it and aspects of it. I know that's a little bit of a disorganized concluding remark, and I apologize for that, but that's everybody else pretty much summed it all up for me. So
yes, thank you, Professor Adrian, Professor Donald, and Mr. Aaron for joining today's session. This is actually great learning for us, and I request all of our audience share our content as much as possible. We also raise funding because we are trying to develop more good content, and we want to reach millions of people. And definitely the developing nations, they have millions of people. In Asia Pacific, 40% population around the world, they live, and 50% to 57% actually youth. So we need to engage with the youth community for develop the better communities and better worlds. So we need all of your support. I want to give special thanks to our speakers, our mentors, those who always support World Talent Economy Forum. Tomorrow we also have our summit on futuristic leaderships. So it will be open dialogue. Anyone want to provide a 10-minute presentations based on their expertise, they can provide, but we try to engage a lot of people, even few countries, very important government officials and other organizations. They always love to observe World Talent Economy Forum shows, and we are trying to solve many problems through this process. Let's say our sustainable development problem, climate change related problem, technological problem. Even when we started this educational contents 1 year before, that time my understanding was we need better content because education will be in trouble. So I believe even that is the fact. In South Asia, they are in really trouble in education industry, $1 trillion loss. So we need to work hard. We need to collaborations with the global communities, and by this way we can help. And even this Iftekhar Patan, he's also my friend. Thank you like for all of your support for World Talent Economy Forum. They are also developing a online platform in India. We are also collaborating with them, and we will support 1 million students. And through this process, we will grow together. We will understand different cultures, and we will develop our communities. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. Hopefully, I will send all our invitation for tomorrow. So hopefully everybody will join, and definitely it's actually really great support from our mentors from different part of the world. Thank you, Professor Adrian. Thank you, Professor Donald, and thank you, my friend, Mr. Aaron. Thank you everyone. Bye-bye and take care.
See you, Sharice.